Today we're talking over our series, Love Is, and you guys are blessed and highly favored because I'm about to step up off the stage and we got someone else coming. Honestly, so when we talk about love, last week we talked about love is hard. It's complicated. It's difficult because love is not just kindness. Love is not just niceness. Love is way more complex and way more difficult than that. And one of the hardest parts about it is conflict. When love is not, when love stops becoming easy and it's like, oh my goodness, we're just on the same page, everything is working out. What do we do? And there is the best person that I know to be able to hit on this from a biblical, spirit-filled, Christ-centered position is actually my sister-in-law, Laura. And so I want you guys grab your notes out. Open your mouths up, guys. We got to give her some feedback. We got to speak with her, help her preach. Can we welcome her? Let's go, Laura Milliken.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to tell you a tiny little bit of my story, but what it really culminates in is talking about relationships, and people is like my hobby. I get a little obsessive about it. And so I'm excited to be able to share with you what I have. What most of you might not know is my mostly full-time gig, my job is a professional conflict resolutionist. And yes, that is a word and a job. Most of my clients I see and I resolve probably 15 to 20 conflicts a day. And most of my clients are the same 4 or 5 people every day. And to be more specific, most of those clients are 3 and 5 years old. I have been a mom of kids for over a decade. And so I have had little toddlers in my house for 12 years straight. And I do this all day, every day. But in reality, what I've learned is it's not that different. I go to my 3-year-old and I say, hey, you broke the connection with your brother, so we need to go to him and we need to say sorry because his heart is sad. I don't want to, right? How many times do we do that as adults? Kids are more raw with it. They're more just out in the open with it, but we might just give the silent treatment. We don't want to, right? If I say to my son, when you spoke to your sister that way, it was very rude. So let's try that again. What if you just go to her and say, hey, I really didn't like when you took my toy. Could you try that again? And he goes over and says, I don't want to. It's the same thing in us when we know what we have to say to our friend, our neighbor, our spouse. And we're just still mad at them. So we just say, I don't want to. And I'm going to be mean to you instead because you took my toy. Because you came home late from work, because you embarrassed me in front of my friends. It's the same thing. Kids just make it so obvious what the adults are already doing. There is a little bit of an irony in me teaching about this because for approximately, and yes, I did the math, 89% of my life, I avoided conflict at all costs. I didn't want to tell you if you hurt my feelings, and if I was mad at you, there's no way I'll tell you. I'm happy all the time, and there's nothing you can do to ever break our relationship. Because I was scared of it. I didn't know how to handle it. But probably about 5 years ago, I went on a deep dive in learning new skills in counseling and reading books and just honestly practicing with my husband in a bumpy and awkward way because it was a new skill for us. And we came out learning a lot of things that I hope to share with you, not only to save you time because maybe you can get there sooner than I did, but maybe to even save you some money in counseling. So it turns out one thing I learned is that there is a science to fighting. It's a thing that people study. There are whole fields where they study how people argue well. And it turns out there's a good way to do it. And there are a lot of really bad ways to do it. And so if we can just kind of learn that, it's going to set us ahead. I used to think that people skills and being able to argue well and communicate was just a personality thing. And I'm guessing a lot of you feel the same way. I'm just not good at that kind of stuff. Well, I would say it's likely because it was just never taught to you. In a perfect world, you would have had parents who walked you through conflict with your siblings. And by the time you got out of the house, you would know how to express your feelings and to be vulnerable and to say sorry. But most people, a lot of people, didn't grow up in that environment. And you chalk it up to, it's just not my personality. But I want to encourage you that this is a skill set. Just like if you showed up at a new job and you're like, I have no idea how to do this job, you wouldn't say it's just not my personality. You'd be like, well, I got to go through the training. So I want you to think of it that way. These are tools that I'm going to talk about that you can actually practice. And for my husband and I, it was bumpy and awkward in the beginning because it was new and it felt cheesy and it felt frustrating. And it was like, oh, after 34 years of not expressing my emotions, I hate this. But it's not like that anymore. There is another side you eventually push past and get to. So just to kind of sum up, tell you where we're going so you can follow with me. I'm going to give you my whole sermon in one sentence. And that is, I want to talk today about let's stop fighting and start understanding. We're shifting a whole entire mindset. Because when we have this mindset of like, oh, I'm in a fight with my spouse, and I say spouse, but just like Pastor Drew said last week, even if you're not married, I'm using marriage as the example because it's the most intense, concentrated environment for relationship. It's the most inescapable environment. It's the most everything's out in the open environment. So if you can master it there, if we can talk about it there, you can apply the same principles to your friendships, the friendship with your neighbor, your in-laws, your friend at work. So I will be referencing marriage often, but please hear it in those contexts as well. But when you have this mindset of like, oh, I'm in a fight with my spouse, or you feel that fight coming, you know people's emotions are on edge and you just feel that this fight is coming. If your mindset is wrapped around a fight, you are going to start digging your heels in. You're going to roll up your sleeves. And you're going to be like, bring it on. Because the world's way of fighting is there has to be, if you're going to be in a fight, there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser. And if that's your mindset going into conflict, you've already lost. You've already destroyed the entire potential for that argument to have. So we're making an entire overhaul of how we even view conflict in the first place. It's not a fight. We're not called to fight our spouse, our friends. We're called to show love. So how do we do that? For me, it helps to think of your fight as an opportunity instead. So if I'm married to Mason, which I am, and I have this basis that he is a good guy who wants me to win in life and he cares for me and loves me, then when we are disconnected, I can say, okay, something got off the track here. He is feeling really hurt, or I'm feeling really hurt. Let's go back and figure out where we got off the track. I'm getting curious. I'm getting curious about his experience because obviously it was different than my experience because I feel like I'm the one that should be mad, right? But he's saying he's mad. So we got to get curious about each other's experiences, which means we have to talk about it. So that's where we're going to go in depth. But what I want to be very clear of is with a wide audience here and online, it is inevitable that some of you are not experiencing conflict, you're experiencing an abusive situation. And I just want to be very clear, that's not what we're talking about today. The tips and tricks and mindset shifts that I'm talking about here are not for someone who finds themselves in a place physically, mentally, emotionally, or verbally abused. And abuse is just simply like you're consistently in a place where somebody is violent towards you. Do you know people can be emotionally violent? They can be verbally violent. So that is a case I would just implore you to go get outside help, talk to your pastor, talk to a counselor, get to a safe spot. With that being said, one area I want to start with is, and this is something that I learned way too late in life, and it does have to do with conflict, but this is like a freebie overall. You can put this whole blanket thing over life. Your joy and your freedom are an inside job. It's you and Jesus. And it applies to conflict because it used to be that if Mason was hurt by me, upset with me, I was a mess. I couldn't handle it because I couldn't handle if anyone was ever mad at me, right? And what I realized is like, I had one foot planted on Jesus and I had one foot planted on Mason, right? And if Mason moved because our connection broke, I fell flat on my face and I was a nervous wreck and I couldn't think straight and my whole life came crashing down. And if you can relate to that, I just want to encourage you, it might be because you have your foot resting on people. We have these things that we hand out to people. It's our joy, it's our power, it's our ability to stay centered on Jesus. And we're like, hey, can you hold this for me? And as long as you stay happy with me all the time, then I'll be happy all the time. Well, inevitably, there will be a break in that relationship and it hurts so bad. And we can't see a path forward because we just fell flat on our faces. So those moments are reminders to take both feet and plant them on Jesus so that when the chaos and the hurt is going on around you, the conflict is rising, you can stay centered on Jesus, you fix your eyes on him, and you can presently deal with the break in relationship that's in front of you. I met this guy in pickleball, actually, last week. Any pickleball players here? Is that hit collective yet? I'm not like amazing, I'm like moderate. I show up once in a while and my sister, I meet her at the door and she's like, there's a guy here and he's so mean. And she's flustered. And I just immediately panic and I'm like, oh, I hate mean people. This is gonna be so scary. And she goes, it's fine, just don't get partnered with him. So I go sit down and I realize I'm partnered with him. And I'm panicking and I'm like, okay. I just tell the lady, I'm like, hey, actually, I just got here. I'm going to sit this next game out. Just go ahead, put me on the next game. I'm going to settle in a little bit. So she does. Well, an hour later, I get partnered with him again anyway. And I have that, I'm handing my power to this complete stranger that I've never met before feeling. And I'm just like, I should just go. Maybe I have to go home. Maybe I just pickleball another day. And I get on the court and my sister goes, go to the other side, then you don't have to be partners with him. So I do. He follows me. And I just gave myself a pep talk and I said, wait a minute, I know what to do. I am acting like old Laura. This is my old pattern. I know what to do. I got my power back and I'm like, I'm going to have a fun day, a fun game. I'm going to be confident in myself, even if this guy's miserable, even if he's deciding to have a miserable day, even if he's trying to take me down. I'll laugh at his snide remarks. I'm going to just choose to have fun because I'm the powerful one. I get to choose my experience right now. So it's the same thing in conflict. When somebody is mad at you and you're centered on Jesus, you are so much more likely to stay focused and centered on the issue at hand so you can find the resolution. And that's what we're talking about is conflict resolution. Okay, so there's an ideal approach to conflict, in my opinion. Instead of rolling up your sleeves, digging in your heels, and trying to figure out who's going to be the winner of this fight, thinking of it, mindset shift as this is going to be an opportunity for me to honor God. So it's really easy to honor God with your words and your actions when life is amazing and everybody's kind to you. But can we honor God when we feel upset and hurt and flustered? It's almost like when you worship, when life is a mess, the worship feels weightier because it cost you something. It's more honoring. It's more connecting with your Christ when you are able to honor him with your words, even though you feel targeted, hurt, angry, triggered. The second one is practicing humility. You see a fight coming, and instead of rolling up your sleeves, you sense it coming, and you're like, okay, where can I be humble here? Even if I feel like only 10% of this conflict is my fault, I'm going to apologize for that 10%. Even if I don't feel like the person deserves to be hurt because what I did doesn't seem like that big of a deal, I'm going to apologize anyway because they're telling me they're hurt. I'm coming in humble. And then the third one is a chance to learn more about the person. This is the part where we get curious. The conflict arises. What is going on here? And I know you guys can relate to this. When conflict arises, don't you feel that feeling of just absolute confusion? Like all of a sudden, you cannot hear each other. You say something, you're like, oh, if I say this, they're going to get it. They're going to understand why I'm so mad. And it's just this mass feeling of confusion. I want you to know that is part of the enemy's plan. Of course, he wants us not to resolve the conflict. Of course, he wants us to stay stuck. And the more he can get us focused on ourselves, what wrong was done to us, where we deserve the apology, and we the more he can do that, the more he wins. And so it's not just like, oh, you should be humble and come to your spouse or come to your friend. It's like you are truly taking your allegiance away from the enemy and partnering with Christ when you choose to be humble, when you choose to apologize, when you choose to speak gently in an argument instead of name calling. You are pulling back your agreement with the enemy, and he's so sly in how he tricks us into partnering with him. It's the same story as the Garden of Eden. Don't you know what God left you out of? Don't you know what you could have? Don't you know how unjust this is? And we start looking at ourselves and we're like, oh, you're right. I do deserve. It's the same trick. Romans 12:18 says, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with your spouse, with your friend, with your people. Two things stick out to me with that. If it's possible. The Bible says it is not possible to resolve every conflict. The second thing is, as far as it depends on you, which means resolving conflict is a two-person job. Two people have a responsibility, and ideally a responsibility to honor Christ, to practice humility, and to learn more about the other person. You unfortunately don't have control over other people's responses, words, emotions. So you might come into a conflict and be completely centered on Christ, doing your best to be kind and patient and apologizing and loving. And that person is determined not to meet you there. They're determined to stay mad. They're determined to keep their sin. They're determined to not see where the enemy has tricked them into staying self-focused. And the sad thing is there is nothing much you can do about that. That person has free will, but just know that you've done what you're able and called to do. Because at the end of the day, Romans 14:12 says, each of us are going to give an account of ourselves to God. It's easy to think that when you're in your kitchen and the kids are in bed and no one's listening, the only person laying witness to the argument is your spouse. But we are truly going to lock eyes with the King someday. And our spouse will not be there with us. We can't say, yeah, but he said. It's just going to be you and him. So this is a two-person job to resolve conflict, but we are accountable for one. Colossians 3:12 says, compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. It sounds a lot like the fruit of the Spirit. But that's what we're called to wear in a conflict, in a fight. That's like the checklist when we stand in front of God and we give an account of our life. How did we love people? How did we treat people? That's the checklist he's going to go through. Did you come with compassion in your arguments with your spouse, with your kids, with your neighbor? Did you use kindness? Did you try to understand their perspective? Were you able to apologize when and where necessary? And not in a way of shaming, but just in a way of self-reflection. I just want you to think of maybe your last argument. And did it emulate the compassion and the kindness and the humility and the gentleness and patience? And maybe some of those things it did and some it didn't. But again, it's not for shaming purposes. It's like God's teaching us how to partner with him instead of the enemy when the enemy comes against our marriages and comes against our relationships. At the very end of this, I'm going to paint a picture for you, walk you through a healthy biblical argument, because a lot of us haven't seen it before. We weren't raised in a house where we saw our parents argue. Either they argued behind closed doors and you knew that there was tension in the house, but you have no idea what they talked about or how they resolved it, or they did it right in front of you and it just wasn't healthy. So you are now an adult having to learn how to argue well, and you've never seen it. So how are we supposed to do something if we've never seen it? So at the end, we're going to kind of paint that picture there so that we have a goal in mind. And before we get there, I want to have you think of which camp you lie in when it comes to an argument. There's typically two groups that I have noticed. And one of them is the camp when an argument comes, they dig their heels in, they roll their sleeves up, and they're saying, bring it on. We've talked about that. They're like, I'm going to win, you're going to lose. I'm big, you're small. I will do any means necessary to make sure that I come out on top and to make sure that I don't look like the guilty one when this is all said and done. And part of that is because that's what you were taught. It's not because you're just a jerk and that's the end. It's because that's what you were taught. And I'm telling you, that is the world's way of fighting. It is a way of fighting, but it's not the kingdom way of fighting. The other group of people are the people who they hear the fight coming, they sense it brewing, and they run and hide under a blanket, and they don't come out until everyone's forgotten about this tension. They're terrified. A fight, an argument, a disagreement is the worst case scenario, and they will avoid it at all costs to the extent where they'll even deny that they have ever had any pain in the first place. They will placate you. They will tell you every shiny thing about yourself that you want to hear. Oh, no, I know I said that hurt my feelings, but I'm over it. Oh, my gosh, it was such a small deal. Don't worry about it. It's seriously nothing. I forgive you. Marriages can have two people from one camp, two people from the other, or one of each, and it changes the dynamic depending on what your dynamic is, but I will promise you that neither of those are kingdom. I used to think that being a kind, supportive wife of Mason meant that I stayed quiet. If we ever had any disagreements, if we ever had any big thing that we came up against, and he had one way of doing it and I had another, I'd bow out every single time. And not because he was forcing me to, I just thought that's what you had to do. But the problem with that is for these people who hide and who quiet their voice, in order for a relationship to have depth and meaning, you have to feel seen. I could show up in a relationship and have friends that I've known for 5 years, but if I've never been able to truly be honest with them, show them my heart, my vulnerabilities, my pain, and then watched them love me in return despite all that gunk, then I will have friends, but I won't feel known by anybody. I'll feel isolated and lonely, and the same goes in a marriage. I talked to my pastor's wife many, many years ago, and she said, I meet women all the time in their 50s, and they've shoved, they've kept quiet, they've diminished their emotions, they've asked for connection with their husband, it wasn't met, and so they just kept quiet until one day they wake up and they're 50 and they're like, I'm ready for a divorce. And the husband's like, what? We have a great relationship. Where is this coming from? It's totally out of the blue. But she shoved and shoved and shoved, and she just wakes up one day and it's like, I'm married to a man. He has no idea who I am. So she was calling me higher. She's like, Laura, when you keep your voice quiet and you don't share your hurts and you don't be vulnerable in front of Mason, you don't disagree with him, what you're doing is you're forcing him to put life's puzzle together with half the pieces, because God is giving him half the pieces and you half the pieces. So by you staying quiet and hiding your pieces, he's looking at all the pieces going, well, what am I supposed to do? This isn't making any sense. It's only until I offer my pieces, which means I have to speak up, that we are truly coming together and making a picture. Even what the Lord speaks will speak half to Mason, half to me. And I just didn't know that. It helped me find my voice. Now, there's nothing honorable about dominating someone in a conversation. We know that. The first camp, dig in your heels, I'm going to win, you're going to lose. There's nothing honorable about that. What my husband helped me realize, though, is in a conflict, there's a lot of pain. And part of that pain comes from realizing it hurts me to hurt him. It hurts me to know that someone I love is hurt by me. So what do? I deflect. Oh, no, I didn't do that. I didn't mean it though. No, you're misunderstanding. I can't just like sit in it and accept that I hurt you because it hurts. I don't want to be a person that hurts you. So instead of deflecting, let that pain, recognize that you're feeling the pain of that, and let that pain fuel your apology instead. And we have to stop arguing intent. That whole thing of like, but I didn't mean to, it's irrelevant. If my son comes running through the living room in excitement and knocks my younger daughter down as she hits her head on the wall, and he invariably every time will come back and say, but I didn't mean to. When I say like, hey, let's go check on her and say sorry. It doesn't matter if you meant to. The fact is she hit her head on the wall. The fact is she's crying. The intent is, it just doesn't matter. If someone says, hey, this hurt, even if you don't understand it, you can still meet them and be like, wow, I had no idea that my words hurt you like that. Thank you for telling me, and I'm so sorry. That's it. We can leave it right there. And just like there's nothing honorable about dominating, there's nothing loving about avoiding conflict. We kind of touched on that. Let your voice be heard. Okay, so I want to go into the practical. I want to paint the picture for you. Just like I said, how do we stop fighting and start understanding each other? Now, these are just very practical bullet points that you could go home and practice today if you needed to. I hope you don't go and get an argument today, but if you do, you could use these bullet points. First one is agree on a good time. You know that if you come home from work and your wife's been with the kids all day or something really stressful is happening, that's not the time to land a bomb on her, right? Agree to a good time. Hey, I have something to talk to you about. Would tonight be a good time? Oh, it wouldn't be? Okay, when would be a good time? Set a time to have conversations that are meaningful. The next one is get your mind in the right spot. Don't roll up your sleeves and dig in your heels. Get into the mindset of, I'm getting prepared to understand your perspective. You can take notes. When someone is explaining to you how or why you hurt them, if it helps you to take notes so you can reiterate to them. So what I'm hearing you say is, invite God into it. If you have to picture Jesus sitting at the kitchen table with you, do it. Both of you. You're going to stand before him anyway. You're going to look him in the eye someday anyway. Why not start imagining that now? It's a layer of accountability. Next one is house rules. I really would encourage you to come up with some house rules that are agreed upon by both that make understanding each other easier and fighting harder. Like, I'll give you some examples. Absolutely no name calling. That is a definite. That's not a personal preference thing. That should be in everybody's house rules. When you're mad, control your tongue. Another one is getting rid of the words always and never. You always. You never. It does not. Those are fighting words. Those words are powerful. Those words make people dig in their heels. It gives them reason to be like, always. We're off track already. If you know you have a bent towards something, write it on your house rules list. And then lovingly keep each other accountable to that. Next one is teaming up against the issue. So I think this is my favorite. When you're in an argument with your spouse, it feels like your spouse and you're eye to eye, and you're just back and forth. How can I get this person to see what I'm saying? How can I get this friend to understand? And instead, what if you picture them coming around standing next to you, and the thing you're opposing is this issue. It's the problem. It's the disrespect. It's the coming home late from work. It's the feeling disconnected from each other. So now it's you and them against the problem. You're uniting to solve this thing that keeps coming up instead of me versus you. One's going to be the winner. One's going to be the loser. Who's it going to be? Lay down your defensiveness. Defensiveness is the number one killer to successful conflict. Defensiveness is always in line with fighting instead of understanding. And And then this sentence, and my husband came up with this, I will directly quote. And instead of saying, you never do this, you always do this, it's this, I will admit it's a little cheesy sentence, but cheesy is cliche for a reason, is because it works. It lays down people's defenses. And it's, I'm struggling with feeling blank. And I would really like your help to feel blank. And be careful what word you put in that first blank, because you don't want to just say angry. Angry doesn't tell them information. What's underneath the anger? Is it disrespected? You feel angry, you feel disrespected because of something your spouse said. You feel forgotten, you feel undervalued. It's a vulnerable word that points to your experience rather than pointing the finger at them. And then you're inviting them to come in and be part of the solution as well. Lastly is, if you need to, go ahead and bring in outside help. There's so much to talk about on this topic. This is a drop in the bucket. We are so intimately created for human connection, which means our biggest hurts and heart wounds are going to be from relationships. Anything you can think of that is tragic and horrifying and traumatic comes from some sort of human interaction, a loss of a person, a hurt relationship. And there's so much to know. There's so many tools to know that you can learn in counseling or by meeting with your pastor or reading an amazing book that was recommended to you. So I'll wrap it up with this question that came in through text here. And then I just want to invite you, if you need any kind of prayer, like I said, this is the most painful part of being a human is relationships. It's the thing that has the most potential for damage and pain. And if you need someone to just boost you in any kind of way, you've been hurt and you're stuck and you don't know how to get through it, past it, over it, I would invite you to come over here. There's going to be the prayer team. You don't even have to tell them the details of your story. You can just say, I just need you to pray for me. And we would love to do that for you today. All right, the question that came in, do you find it more productive to solve conflict immediately or to wait a day? That's a great question. I think it depends on your personalities. Some people, my husband, loves to solve it right away. Let's go. We got a problem. Let's fix it. I tend to need a minute. I need to gather my thoughts. I'm an internal processor, so I need to figure out how I feel about it first. I need to take down my defenses, get my heart right with the Lord, and then I'm ready to talk about it. If I had to pick one or the other, I'd say give it a breath. Give it a minute to settle in. Center your heart so that you're not reacting to the conflict, but you are managing it. You're approaching it together. And one more question here is, do you find it more productive? Oh, never mind. You sent me the same one. Okay, so we'll wrap it up with that. There's so much more to be learned about this. I hope you guys, if you need more information, come talk to me, Pastor Drew, Pastor Morgan. We'll get you some resources, but it's a big deal. This stuff is a big deal. I'll wrap it up in prayer here, and then if you need to, go ahead and meet the prayer team. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time to talk about this. God, I pray that you've prepped our hearts. I pray that even one bullet point, whatever was needed to be heard today, would land in the hearts of the people, and it would go deep and it would stay, and that we would know and learn that we can honor you in our fighting. We can honor you when our hearts are torn open. We can honor you when we're feeling hurt. And so, God, we just invite you into these moments. Help this to be at the forefront of our brain. Help us to love well and help us to argue well in a way that brings us closer in our relationships and us closer to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Before you go, turn it back on real quick. Does anyone want to know what happened to the pickleball guy she got paired with? Will you tell the rest of that story?
Okay, yes. So I I gave myself my pep talk. I got up to him and I was like, okay, I know what to do. So I did the whole just kill him with kindness thing. I told myself, this is a guy, I don't know if this is true, but this is what I told myself. This is a guy who grew up in a family that was mean to him. He never had anyone be nice. He's trying to prove his self in a pickleball court at a YMCA. So great. I will compliment his pickleball skills and I will be kind to him and make eye contact and be genuine about it. And truly, we were very good buddies by the end of it, and it was fine.
Let's go.
And just to give context, this was a truly impossible man that everyone at the YMCA avoids.
He has a nickname at this place.
Okay, so this wasn't just some easy thing to turn around, but I think the interesting thing to point out about that is the enemy, anger, manipulation, insults can be a 1,000-pound gorilla in a room, but when you bring compliments and honesty and genuineness, it's a 1,000,000-pound gorilla in the room, and the scale tilts. And the interesting thing is, scientifically, at an atomic level inside of us, different emotions carry different weights, okay? Anger has less weight than compassion. And the emotion that has the greatest weight of all is love, okay? So think about that. If inside of you, if you feel stuck in anger, love will always tilt the scales, okay? Very, very powerful.
Hey, thanks so much for watching today's message. Our prayer is more than the words that were spoken in the message, that you would remember the things that God spoke to your heart.
Yeah, and no matter what it was that God spoke to you, I know that part of your journey is other people, being in a community, because we are better together. So if you made a decision to follow Jesus today, would you click the link below and fill out the form? This is gonna help us so that we can celebrate with you and equip you with some tools so that your next steps are great steps.
Yeah, thanks so much for watching. We're praying for you. We're cheering you on. We believe that the best days are ahead of you.